Hello, and welcome to Creative Banter, a creativity and philosophy-focused podcast where anything goes. I'm your host, Cody Schultz. Joining me is the one and only Ben Horn. In this episode, we are discussing the idea of starting fresh, how our perspectives are constantly changing, and smelling trees? Let's dive right into it, shall we? So I know I mentioned last time that I was scanning in some of my film and redoing my portfolio. So that's now officially done with. It's up and
Well, that's good.
website. It seems a little bit cleaner now. I reduced my, my four galleries into just one with, I think, a little over 30 images. But I was thinking on that, and before I went with it, I just kind of had this urge, especially going back to film, to just kind of throw everything from the past out and just start fresh.
Did you find that there was a certain date, for example, not like a specific date, but like however many years ago, that was like a dividing line between an older style or older direction of work and the current direction, or something along those lines, where you look at the work after a certain point in time and you're more favorable towards that? Or was it just wanting to go back through absolutely everything and sort of pick and choose things for a particular reason?
I would say that 2019 was kind of that date. I kind of go back and forth because I started photography back in 2014, but 2019 was kind of a shift where things really started changing. That was when I picked up large format and when I really started to make the photographs that I'm most proud of.
Now the pictures that were shot before then, would you say that there was anything different about that work in terms of, like, from a technical standpoint? Was it just overcoming like technical proficiencies, or was it a change in vision?
A change in vision. Yeah, it was a lot of the work that a lot of the subjects I was photographing were like waterfalls, or trying to go with like the grand vistas kind of things as much as we could over in Pennsylvania here. But then it was a massive shift away from that pretty quick in 2019.
See, for me, I'd say it's probably about 2016. I'm in the process of writing an ebook, which has to do with iconic locations and learning to find our own subjects. And one of the exercises I did in that book is I looked at all the photos I've taken in Zion. My first visit in recent years was 2007. First solo trip was 2009. But the first of what I consider to be my top 5 photos was taken in 2016.
Interesting.
And I found that in 2016, and then it was 2017, all the way through 2021. And I found that there was a shift in my perspective, in my viewpoint at that point in time, which was a matter of starting to see beyond the obvious stuff, beyond the iconic sort of subjects. And so that really led to a different emphasis in my work. But I still like those older photos. Do you have, for you, is there anything older than that point in time where you were drawn to still some of the older stuff for one reason, or is it pretty much just that defining line of about 2019?
There are a couple pieces that I still have in my portfolio, or that I have hanging on the wall here, that were from like 2018 or before. Not many. And I don't know if it's necessarily because they are digital versus them being film, and that there's something with digital that just doesn't sit right with me anymore since going with film. And I don't know if that's some just made up thing in my head, or if it's just because I wasn't as connected to that process as I am using the large format camera.
I mean, I could see how it would be a little bit of both. We're certainly more invested in the work when working with a large format.
Right. Yeah.
It's so much more process oriented, and you really do have to be more attuned to your surroundings. I found that some of my older work, the stuff from 2009 through 2015 or so, I found that I wasn't digging very deep in terms of the subject matter. A lot of it was chasing some of the grander scenes, like you had mentioned. But then there came a shift, and I think it was actually, thinking back to it, I think it's in 2013, there was a very early year for fall color. And I think that was the moment where I started shifting to different sorts of subjects. And so was there anything else in addition to just a change of equipment? Was there any other shifts or anything, any sort of hardship or anything to overcome that made you that provided a different perspective on things for you?
2019 was also the year that I did some art shows in the summer. And
okay.
Yeah, it was a hardship that I came to face that I wasn't expecting to face it in the way that I did. And it really just knocked the wind out of me, because now I invested all this money into art shows and didn't make like any of it back. And so I was taken aback by it. I was like upset by it, because I put all this effort into it and I was expecting at least like better reception to my work than what there was. And so then in December of that year was when I came across the work of Guy Tall and his articles, and particularly his book More Than a Rock. And that was really the big shifting point for me in terms of my mindset around photography. So it wasn't necessarily just the change in equipment, but also having read that book and having the new perspective on both life and art in general was the big change.
I've actually never read his book. I've heard of it. I mean, I've certainly heard of it. I've heard it mentioned a lot as a inspirational book. But for whatever reason, I haven't read it yet. So I need to change that. I do need to read that.
Yeah, they just came out with a second edition of More Than a Rock. And he has another book that he published, Another Day Not Wasted. And then I guess Rocky Nook and him are partnering up for another book coming out in November, which I'm looking forward to. So yeah, he's very prolific and like for me a big inspiration, but not as much with his photographs, but with the whole mindset and perspective that he provides. And those books, like I said, they constantly breathe new life into me.
Yeah, I'm gonna definitely have to check that out. I could also see that being good reading while out on a trip trying to kill some time, and being surrounded by kind of out in that environment.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Does it have to do with changing the way of seeing the world around you, seeing the subjects, or like I'd be curious for just like a kind of a gist of it.
At least what I got from it was just changing your mindset towards more of a going out into nature for the sake of going out to nature, rather than going out for the sake of photographs, and being more mindful of your surroundings and just learning to enjoy your time out there for what it is, rather than for any kind of external benefit.
So basically the exact opposite of social media influencers who go out into the nature to create content for the sake of creating content.
100%. Yes.
Yeah. There's something definitely very true about, because it sounds like it's a matter of needing to form that connection with the world around you. And I can see how as photographers we view things through, from that perspective. It really must blind us to so many other things that are around us. Because even just thinking about going out on a trip and spending some time somewhere and just, having your senses being so alive in terms of what you see, what you smell, the cold touch of the stone that you're sitting on, all your senses coming alive. And then as photographers, I think for the most part, we set a lot of that aside just in search of whatever next image.
Yeah, he makes a point of mindfulness meditation, of making a visual inventory where if you come up to a scene or you're just sitting down relaxing while out in nature or wherever, to make a list, whether on a physical list or just mental, and write down everything that you see. Just every little detail that you can tell, and like just whatever comes to mind in terms of what you're seeing. And it's amazing what you realize you were missing, like the little details that you were missing. And it reminds me of, I think Sarah Marino had posted on Twitter at one point that she had been going up to Vermont and Maine, that area, for how long now, and just recently realized the vast number of mushrooms. So it's amazing what we all miss out on when we are so dead focused on getting a photograph or getting to a destination to photograph.
See, now that's really interesting because that's actually one of the things that I'm writing about in the ebook I'm working on. I'm calling it active scene. I don't know if there's a name for it, but that's just what I'm calling it.
Right.
And the theory is that, I use an example of, let's say you walk into a busy Costco or some sort of large warehouse store, and there's one product you want to get there, and you can't find it. You're just like walking up and down the aisles, you can't find it. As it turns out, there's a subtle change in the packaging, and you're looking for, that red box with white letters, but now it's a yellow box with red letters, because we don't look at all the details. We just skim over the surface, and you just see something as a tree. But then if you actually spend time taking a closer look at that tree and studying the structure of the branches, looking at the texture of the bark, touching it, smelling it, you pull up so much more detail about that scene. And then that allows us to find these beautiful opportunities that are just absolutely hiding in plain sight. And that's one of the strategies that I've done in the ebook. I'm talking. I write about how I was out wandering the dunes with a certain subject in mind, but then I come across this kind of purple-looking rock on the ground, and it really, I picked it up. It's about the size of my fist, and it really, drew my attention to a different sort of subject than I was looking for. And then I ended up finding this really beautiful subject of this large boulder surrounded by blown sand that I would have walked right past otherwise. But I had shifted my attention toward that. And that particular subject came to mind also when you were talking about the title of his book, More Than a Rock, because that's very much how I felt that subject was, because it allowed me to put a little piece of me kind of into that scene and see it as more than a rock.
That title comes from an Edward Weston quote. He goes, "This then, to photograph a rock, have it look like a rock, but be more than a rock." Which I think is really, like you were saying, just you see these little intimate subjects, and especially like Weston's work, you may just see the subject for what it is at face value. But then you look a little bit deeper and you realize, oh no, this means so much more.
Definitely. It's quite the process in order to find the sort of subjects. And I find that for me personally, I don't know how it is for you, but for me personally, I have to sort of shut the rest of my mind off and concentrate only on what's in front of me. And even just like, as you're mentioning, creating a list and, writing down your observations about a thing. I just find that in that sort of situation, my mind has to be thinking only about that subject. Then you notice all those other smaller details. And I find it usually leads you to something you wouldn't otherwise find, which is kind of a fascinating part of the process.
Yeah, it is. When I was up in Acadia, I went to a lighthouse, that more popular lighthouse, but we were there, so I wanted to check it out. And walking around on these bigger rocks right side of the ocean, and you had these little tide pools. And yeah, the lighthouse was nice, but the sky didn't have really any cloud formations, anything interesting in it. So I made a photograph of it, but whatever. What I found instead, though, were in these tide pools were little snails, just on these tall, wispy, like sea grass or seaweed. And so I started photographing those. And the number of people that were around us that were like, well, first of all, I'm using a large format camera, so all eyes are on me.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
but
Oh, for sure.
but still, the number of people that were like, well, what are you photographing? Like, you're looking down into the, and no idea that these little snails were in the water like this, or that these little creatures, there's a whole ecosystem within this little tide pool that just came to life within, who knows, maybe the week that it's been there. And unfortunately, the 3 or 4 photographs that I made, for one reason or another, I haven't quite figured it out, but they didn't work out. But it still goes to show that you can miss so much if you're not, like you were saying, actively seeing. If you're not actively paying attention to the environment around you. And if your mind is so dead set on getting to the destination or getting a specific photograph, you're going to miss out on a ton.
Now, there's another aspect of what you're mentioning there in the story, which I'm curious about. So you're picturing, you're describing a tide pool area. Now, were you wearing were you barefoot? Were you wearing flip flops? I'm curious about that, because there's something about when we engage our senses even more. And I'm thinking specifically of a backpacking trip I went on where my shoes are wet. So I set them out in the sun so they could dry. And then I'm just walking around barefoot, and just having that extra sensory input of walking around barefoot compared to wearing boots, it gave me a completely different perception of the area where I was, because I was just engaging more of the senses. So I'd be curious, do you think that had an impact on your situation where you noticed those smaller details?
I wasn't barefoot or anything, just because we were there in May and it was still quite cool.
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, when I go on like regular trails, I'm constantly like touching trees, or just like I'll stop randomly and just like put my hand against a tree and just run it down the bark, just to have that kind of connection, which looks odd to most people, but
Yeah.
but it's amazing what you can achieve with that, though. And
You ever give them a good sniff?
I can't say I've ever sniffed a tree. No.
You got to try it. Especially pine trees.
Okay.
I don't know if they have too many out where you are, but certain pine trees, oh, they smell so good. It smells like vanilla.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
I'm going to have to go out and sniff some trees then.
And actually, I do the same thing for cottonwood trees too. They have this kind of tangy kind of smell to them, which when I smell it, it takes me back to, time spent in Zion or some of the canyons in Utah, where that, I don't know if it's just the oils in it, which just has like this very notable aroma. And then also the maples, they have a bit of a kind of a pungent sort of smell to it. And the moment I catch a whiff of that, it just takes me to a certain place, because I think scent, it ties us to, I don't know if it's like childhood memories, but it takes you straight to that point in a way that touch and that sight doesn't. There's something about scent.
Interesting.
Do you take notes in the field?
What do you mean by notes?
Whether it's from a photographic standpoint in terms of for processing later, or just to draw your attention to something or to make note of something so that you don't forget it?
Sometimes. I used to be big on taking photographs of like my camera as it was set up, and then write on the photograph the settings that I had used. And I still take photographs of the setup with a composition in it, just because that way I don't develop my film for a while. I won't be developing film for a couple months yet.
Mm-hmm.
That way I know what date belongs to each photograph. But I've since stopped with the whole taking notes of the settings that I use, because at the end of the day, they don't really mean anything.
Yeah.
But past that, here and there, if like an idea for an article or just like a thought floats by that I want to jot down quick, I'll either jot it down on my phone, or I have a little moleskin notebook that I carry around with me that I've actually been trying to use more recently.
Because I find that to be a very useful tool, and for both of the reasons that you mentioned. I mean, in some cases, because I have something that's, that I think of when I'm out and about. But other times I'll notice something about a particular location where I am. And I find that if I don't just jot down a little note about it, that oftentimes I'll forget about that. But the process of writing it down helps to commit it to memory even more so, which I think then allows me to have a bit more of a heightened sense of awareness of things around me. Kind of going back to what you were talking about with Guy Tall and his writing about, wanting to take very specific notes, whether it's physical or mental, about what's around you and your surroundings. But I do find I found that taking notes has been increasingly an important part about my process and helping to raise awareness of the things around me.
Do you find that you're taking notes more on your phone or physically, like on a piece of paper?
If I'm out in the field, I prefer to write it down. Something about the process of writing something down. If it's an idea for some sort of project, the phone's fine for that. But I think the process of physically writing it down helps to reinforce whatever kind of pathways in my brain to help me to actually remember it, even without the notes necessarily.
Yeah.
So there's something about just the physical act of writing it versus just tapping on a phone, which doesn't quite have the same impact.
They say the same thing with schooling. So like a big thing that even like my college professors have said is take more notes with pen and paper rather than on the laptop, which obviously isn't as convenient, especially carrying around a bunch of notebooks for classes on top of textbooks and all that. But you have a closer connection to what you're writing down when you're using a like pencil or pen than you do when you're tapping, like you said, on the phone or on a keyboard. You commit it more to memory for one reason or another. So I think that's interesting that you specifically want to write them down on pen and paper. And I do the same thing as much as I can. Just I think for that same reason. I think you just remember it better.
Yeah, and thinking of the sort of the college experience, I didn't even have a laptop in college. I had a desktop at home. But yeah, all the notes were handwritten. And there were some classes where I never even had to look at those notes again. Like I didn't even have to study. I took a lot of geology classes and meteorology classes and stuff along those lines. But I could just write down the notes, and I do a lot of doodling in the margins of the notes as well. But that was part of the process too. Kind of those just like the little drawings and stuff, completely unrelated. But something about just the whole process of writing it down was important. And then there was also, it was from one of those books about, like being successful and stuff, about, writing a person's name down, then throwing it away, crippling it up and throwing it away.
Yeah.
And the simple act of doing that allows you to remember things. So there's definitely something to that. And also I kind of wonder, is that something that's far more common for film shooters? I mean, I kind of wonder if that's common with digital shooters, or just we're taking the time to slow down anyway, so maybe we're the ones writing more notes.
I think it goes back to like I had said about writing down your like processing notes or the settings that you would use for a photograph. That's just something that kind of goes hand in hand with large format and has for, I think, since its inception. I know that Ansel Adams did it quite a bit. So I think that whole carrying a notebook with you was just kind of, it's part of the kit when it comes to film. And with digital, I think...
Yeah, especially with specific processing instructions and keeping notes on stuff like that, which I haven't had much of a need to do. But for black and white, that stuff is very important.
That whole idea gets exacerbated when you're doing writing, whether like for you collecting ideas for an ebook, or for me just jotting down little notes here and there, or entire paragraphs relating to an article that I want to write. And I think that's a big difference too, which more digital photographers could probably relate to than the writing down of the processes.
And actually, now that you mentioned, writing an article and things that you think of, yesterday it was kind of the morning, and I wanted to write a little bit more for the ebook, but I was just drawing blank. So I did something I haven't done for almost a year now, which is drive down to the bay and go kayaking down there in the afternoon. And I was thinking about it, it's been that long because it was last June that we got our dog Oliver.
Mm-hmm.
And it took quite a while until I could, leave the house and have him not, do things he's not supposed to. But now he's really good with that. So I was able to go down there, go kayaking, went like a couple miles or so. And it was a little bit of wind out and stuff. So it's, it's a pretty good workout. But as soon as I got back from that afternoon of kayaking, it really just cleared my mind, and I had zero issues trying to write what was on my mind. And so with your writing, that kind of got me thinking, is there any sort of activities that you do that helps put you in a better state of mind, whether it's for writing, whether it's for photography, or anything else kind of along those lines?
I think just being out in nature as much as I can helps with that more than anything else. I mean, my problem with my writing is that I don't do it nearly as often or consistently as I probably should, just because I lack the motivation for it. And I don't know whether that comes from being at class all day and then coming home and I just don't want to do anything anymore.
It's a lot on your plate.
Yeah. But whenever I'm out in nature, I'm definitely more conducive to being creative and having my thoughts flow a lot better. And so I think like even just sitting outside and trying to write there, and even like going back to that whole pen and paper thing, I found that I could get my thoughts out a lot nicer and not worry so much about like spelling mistakes or any kind of grammatical errors when I was writing on paper and just writing flow of consciousness kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or surrounding one topic.
That's been my experience as well. Like I'll have a theme of some part that I want to write on, and I'll just have these notebooks. Or I should say more. It's just a pad of paper, and I found that just going out, laying in the hammock, and just writing as much as I could, not trying to be in any way perfect, but just trying to get the thoughts out on paper.
Yeah.
After a while, it just felt kind of effortless. And then that's what serves as the framework. I mean, I have these pads of paper, one for each of the ebooks I've done, where I just write everything I can. And I'm just drawing arrows and kind of changing the order on stuff. And then I'll take that and I'll eventually start doing a document on my computer where I start trying to clean things up. But I hadn't really thought about it, but it really is that process of writing it down and just getting things out where, and this also reminds me a little bit of my experience working with the film camera versus the digital, where with the digital, it felt like there's something in between me and what I was trying to do. But with the film camera, I feel like I'm just integrated into the process. I don't feel like there's an obstruction between me and what I'm doing. And that's kind of like my experience writing things down physically is kind of like the experience of working with the film camera versus working within the constraints of, the computer gave me a similar feeling to working with digital.
Yeah, I think it all comes back down to that hands-on approach and like you said, the better connection that you get when you're right in the midst of things, because you're staring at a computer screen and you have no connection to it.
Yeah. It feels kind of distant.
So what other topics have you been writing about in your ebook?
It's mostly the process of learning to see things in better detail, but also going with a theme-based approach as opposed to specific locations. And so for that, the process is mostly if I see anything that stands out to me for one reason or another, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, I'll make a little note of it. whether it's the texture of something, whether it's the form of something, whether it's the light somewhere. And I find that by making a note of it, it brings it to the forefront of my mind. And then I'm better able to see whatever that is. So kind of like if you're researching a car or something, then you just see that car driving around everywhere.
Right, yeah.
So it's going with more of a theme-based approach and drawing inspiration from the world around us as a way of finding your own subjects and seeing beyond the icons, which is what the name of the ebook is going to be. So really it's a matter of just learning to see differently as opposed to just skimming the surface, which is what we're trained to do. And also maybe it's a bit like bringing back a little bit of what it's like when we were kids. Because I think there was a study that was showing that given an option of having to choose something like from say there's a list of several things, kids have a tendency to kind of read each individual item versus adults, they'll just skim over it without really taking it in. But you just look at the shape of the words and you think you kind of know what the word is. And along that note, I mean, there was a month or so ago, I was walking out of a Target, and then just ahead of me was this mom and their little kid. And the first thing I hear as I'm kind of walking towards the parking lot is I hear the kid say, "Oh, fire." And I'm like, what fire? And sure enough, I look to my left and there's a huge fire. I mean, it's like a block away, but it's taller than like a 4-story building. Is some palm trees that were on fire on just a clear day, midday. And this kid noticed something that all the other adults were like not even paying attention to.
Isn't that amazing?
So I think it's something that, I think it's something that we lose as we quote grow up. You know, that experience of just being more, of having a heightened sense of awareness of what's around you. That's kind of what I'm getting at with the book. And there's different techniques and stuff to use, which is what I've been trying to formulate into words, which is always the toughest part for something along those lines.
Do you think that losing of awareness has anything to do with the general loss of creativity that most people face growing into adulthood? Because I know that kids in particular, when they're young, I mean, everyone knows they're going around with imaginary friends or they're playing games and they're just creative individuals. And I think school especially kind of kills that as we grow older, because we just formulate into the factory kind of setting that the world needs us to be into in order to keep the world turning. But do you think that loss of awareness coincides with that?
I think it does. It seems like it's, stamped out of us, rather than sitting in class and, daydreaming or whatever, or, doodling or, whatever, then you're, having to, there's a higher degree of conformity that's needed. And it does seem like that aspect of us is stamped out of us. And even times like in Death Valley, there'll be times where I'm waiting for a composition. I just lay down and watch clouds go by. It's like, when's the last time that we have an opportunity to do something like that in our everyday life? But I think that's one of the reasons why I do enjoy going out in the field on the photography trips and trying to be more aware of what's around us, to try to bring back some degree of that level of observation that I think we do lose as we get older.
And I think that doesn't help when so many people are going out on these ventures into nature and they're hyper focused on getting to that one subject that they want, that grand landscape, that iconic photograph that they're trying to capture, which goes back to the fact that most people are working full-time jobs on top of wanting to be making it as a full-time photographer. And so they don't have the time to go out and explore like you or I do. And so they have to kind of get what they can. But I think it also goes back to that loss of awareness because of them being hyper-focused, but also because they're conforming. They're conforming to what everybody else kind of expects from them.
I've always been one to want to go a bit of the different direction. Like for me, like the whole idea of conforming to a certain standard. And I guess with social media, the benefits would be, gaining more followers or stuff like that. And I honestly don't care about that.
No, it's not worth it.
But there's something that you're talking about there, which was something else that I've been writing about, which is, the amount of time necessary to produce meaningful photography. And one of the points that I wrote about in the ebook is that the amount of time I spend in the field now is largely unchanged from how much time I spent in the field when I was juggling a day job along with my photography adventures. And on an average year, I spend about 21 days in the field. I think most people would look at that, and for a landscape photographer, they just assume that you're out every day. They assume that you're just constantly going places. And some people are. But for me personally, 21 days, that's good for me. I don't really have much of a desire to spend a huge amount more. Now, some of that's also because, I have a lot of work to do once I get back to put everything together, the videos and the photos and such. But I definitely can relate to that feeling you had mentioned where, people don't have a lot of time away from work and away from family and everything else. And they want to go to an area and they want to feel productive.
Right.
But it also leads to creating work that largely, if you don't put yourself into your work, it's going to feel rather sterile. People can tell. If a person has a portfolio that has nothing but iconic images, it doesn't really say anything. There's not a lot invested in it. They can be absolutely beautiful images. But I find personally that for a subject to have meaning and to make it into something even greater, it's really important to find your own subjects, which is hard to do and it takes time, but I think it's an important part of the process. But, here I am only spending 21 days in the field now as I did before.
Which has always interested me, just your approach to photography as a whole, and really just spending time to get to know primarily two different areas and really not spending a ton of time throughout the year at them, yet still being able to come away with meaningful photographs that resonate with you, but that also you can tell they're your photographs because of the approach that you take to them and just the time that you put into them. And I think it goes to show that it all has to do with mindset more than anything else, more than time or any of that. I mean, you can make the excuse all day long that you don't have enough time to make meaningful images that are uniquely yours. But at the end of the day, I mean, I don't go out terribly much, or I especially don't photograph terribly much when I'm using film. So yet I'm still finding images that are uniquely mine.
Yeah, because we are surrounded by so much, and having the blinders of you can only find photos at particular locations or at particular moments in time, particular seasons. I think that really acts as blinders, and that's unfortunately what we see a lot of when it comes to social media and everything else along those lines. But we are surrounded by opportunity. And I think each person's going to be a little bit different in terms of what kind of mindset they need to be in to be able to produce work. But we are surrounded by opportunity, and that's one of the things I always remind myself when I go on these trips, especially when I'm having a hard time finding something. I just think, hey, I just probably passed by like 5 great things right now, and I just wasn't even paying attention.
Yeah, that's something that more people need to realize, and it's unfortunate because the vast majority will never get to that point because, like you said, they want to go to a place, feel productive, and come home with something that in their eyes is worthwhile.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to do that when you go out into the woods and you may not see anything that could make a good composition that day because your mind isn't in it, or the conditions aren't right, or whatever excuse you want to give it. And so, yeah, Yeah, that's like I said, it's unfortunate that more people won't be able to realize that.
Yeah.
But for the few that do, I think it's going to make a massive impact on their photography as a whole if they stick with it.
Oh, for sure. And actually going to something we spoke about last week, because we were talking about social media, and I had mentioned about how I was going to take a break from social media just ahead of the trip. And so I'm about a week into that now. I deleted Instagram from my phone. I with Twitter is a little bit more tricky because I changed the password to something random, then I log out. Because that one can be accessed from the web browser as well. So I make it where I just, I can't cheat. I can't go back onto it. But I gotta say, this past week that I've been off of it, I've been very productive. It's something that we, for the most part, need to have to some degree. But how long has it been now since you sort of gave that up? Because I was trying to think about how long it's been now.
It's tough to say exactly how long. So for the one school project that I had to do, I had to go back onto Instagram. And so
Yeah.
I reactivated it maybe like a month ago or so, and scrolled through some stuff. But for the most part, I wasn't enjoying it, which I found interesting.
You weren't getting the dopamine hits.
I wasn't getting anything from it. I like
Interesting.
And prior to that, it had probably been like a solid 6 months, if not longer. I don't remember exactly when I got off of it, but it was just really weird to have that app and just to want to get rid of it so bad. Because I found it interesting too that I tried, after I was done doing the observation thing, which only took like a day or two anyway, I tried to disable my account again. And Instagram was like, yeah, no, you can't do that for like another week. You can't.
Oh.
Yeah, it stopped me from being able to disable my account. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So I just kind of like largely ignored it. Surprisingly easy.
Yeah, which it didn't sound like you would have had much difficulty with that based on your experience of not really being drawn back into it.
Yeah, and I don't know if that was just because I had been away from it for so long, or I just don't see the point to it anymore.
Yeah.
It's just it's a time suck, and there's no benefit on there for me.
Yeah, I see it as something that's nice to take a break from, though at the same time, it's something that I definitely, I'll have to reactivate it back again and log back in and do all that. But also there's the little bit of irony of, having a podcast now where it's like, people are gonna have to find out about this somehow. so there's some ramifications along those lines. The word of mouth is certainly a important motivating factor for many. But yeah, it'll be interesting because I'm really looking forward to seeing how it changes my state of mind ahead of going on to the backpacking trip. But so hard. Maybe it's just because the weather this week is so nice. I mean, it's just a nice breeze out. It's nice and warm.
You want to send some of that my way?
Yeah.
We're not.
It's abundant here. That's for sure.
We're getting up to finally getting back up and to the warmer weather. I think it's supposed to hit 81 on Sunday, but
wow.
Yeah, which is surprising. But right now it's overcast and mid 60s. So yeah, send some of that weather my way, please.
Yeah, and I mean we've had a lot of that, and just I was out just working in the back patio, just doing some writing out there. It was just such a good, welcoming environment to being creative and everything else. So yeah, I would have a hard time living in a climate where it was overcast a lot. I mean, as much as I love the lushness of the Pacific Northwest, something about it, man. I need to have that. I need to have that sunshine.
It's the same thing with like living in the UK too.
Yeah.
You have all of this just cloudy, dreary weather, and that plays real hard on your mental health then too.
Oh yeah.
Because you can't get the vitamin D from the sunshine as nearly as much. And
yeah,
which in turn goes right back to your creativity, I think. And whether you can be in the proper mindset to be creative. I think it makes it a lot tougher when the weather is just kind of meh.
I hope you enjoyed our creative banter. You can learn more about Cody's work by visiting his website, codyschultz.com, and you can find my work at benhorn.com. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach out to us by email at cody@codyschultz.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you around next time.